Chapter 10. The Good Little Mouse. August offered a stunned Ella his hand to help her into the carriage, but before she could take so much as a step, Lady Tremaine grabbed the door and shut it. "Move!" she stomped. Charles glanced back at Ella and August still waiting on the lawn. "Lady Tremaine?" Ella asked. "So help me, boy, if you do not get this carriage moving in the next breath," said Lady Tremaine, reaching through the window and motioning for Charles to leave. The carriage took off. Ella seemed to wither, sinking in on herself with an exhale, and August offered her his arm. August's fury cut through his confusion like a blade. "Come on," he whispered. "We need to see the statue to prove the falcon cuff is gone, and it's a shorter walk to the cemetery from here than from your home anyway. She's doing us a favor leaving then." She laughed hollowly and took his arm. August would be leaving her again soon. Given how thoroughly she had isolated herself from the rest of Fresnay, she would be all alone with Lady Tremaine and her stepsisters. The idea crept over him like an icy chill. One more day. That was all the time he had left with her. Her mood is no excuse, and said August. "Has she done anything like this before?" "No, she's never left me anywhere," she said, and glanced up at him. When she caught sight of his scowl, she leaned against him and sighed. "She's never taken me anywhere either. We don't really go places, and she's very strict with Drizella and Anastasia. She doesn't leave them alone for long." August could believe that. She seemed controlling, desperately pushing her daughters to pursue what she wanted. There was a special kind of hurt in that, which August knew well. Being royalty came with expectations, and little room for change, though it also came with plenty of privileges. But his father still supported him, even when they didn't agree. They started walking to the cemetery. The night was warm and thrumming with the songs of hungry owls and rustling field mice. The road back to town was winding and far too long to take on foot, so August tugged her into one of the barley fields alongside the road. Cutting through it and its neighbors would get them closer to the southern hills they had played in as children. Ella let her head fall back to study the stars as they carried on. August tried to smother the warm feeling her closeness awoke in his skin. He tried to ignore the brush of her hair against his nose. He tried to think about anything other than the comfortable feeling of her tucked against his side, and failed at it all. He sighed, and he tried to think of what to say, of how to convince her to leave. She deserved better. Ella looked at him, eyes narrowed, and shook her head. "I know that look. Are you going to try to talk me into leaving?" she asked. "Leave my family, leave Fresnay, leave my problems, but no one ever asked me what I want, and if I want to leave. I can't imagine wanting to leave. No adventure could be as comforting as my childhood home." She slipped from his grip and turned to face him, walking backward. "I know every step, nook, and secret in that house. I know that the hallway rug feels softer underfoot than the entry one, and that if I open the door to the study while lifting it slightly, then it won't squeak. I know how many mice live in the walls, and which one is coming to steal my crumbs based on the sound of their little feet," she said, smiling up at the night sky. "I know Fresnay better than I know myself. Why would I ever want to leave?" She walked with an assurance he had never possessed back home, and a loving, gentle envy seeped into his chest. She was right. It wasn't fair to ask that of her. Blanche walks around town every morning, and she calls it a constitutional. But it's so she can clean up anything on the roads before everyone else is up and traveling. Pickard will hem and haw about his wayward apprentice and his new-fangled ideas, but he'll taste every single experiment that boy bakes, even the ones with almonds. He hates almonds. Ella laughed and shrugged, throwing her arms out. "And Oliver, clever and kind and bored because he's far too smart for the work he's doing, will return to Fresnay after university because he doesn't want to leave his parents. And most importantly," she said, "I know that next we'll be walking through a beautiful lavender field with a little stone bench on one side where people can sit to take in the sight. The farmer who owns it says he didn't put it there, but he did. If you wanted to take in the sights, you only had to say so. August followed after her, plucking a fallen twig and twirling it in his fingers. You shouldn't have to leave to feel safe. But if she didn't, what future awaited them? With him in the city and her in Fresno, they would only be able to visit occasionally. They could write constantly. The day of travel was nothing for messages, even if it made meeting when not working frustrating. And perhaps it could be like when they were younger. She tucked her hair behind her ear, close enough to touch, yet so far. His chest went cold. Ella reached out and touched his arm. You're staring at where you should be staring, he said, smiling. You're about to trip. Ella hesitated, heel a hair's breadth from a stone. Once upon a time, she said, you would have let me fall. Once upon a time, I was a child with a child's sense of humor, said August. I'm not that August anymore. He didn't want things to be like they were before. What do you hope will happen if you stay? He asked, curious as to what Ella wanted. If I stay, that's easy, she said. Drizella will spend tomorrow in bed, crying about her mother promised her the Baron, despite Lady Tremaine never having done that, and Lady Tremaine will say that the Baron is not worthy of her. Drizella will demand hot chocolate for her nerves, but she'll forget to drink the chocolate. Ella winked at him. I'll drink it. Then everything will repeat. Lady Tremaine will find someone else to offer her daughters to, and eventually someone will agree. It's not as if Drizella and Anastasia are devoid of good qualities. She's nurturing the bad ones. Lady Tremaine will spend far too much on Drizella's wedding and only too much on Anastasia's, and Anastasia will notice. She won't say anything, but she will be nice to me while I comfort her. Then they'll be off with their new families. She wagged the twig on her right, and she stepped over the little hill of earth, marking the start of the next field. Then, without looking or waiting for an input from him, she perfectly navigated to a small makeshift bench, overlooking the rustling lavender behind her. Lady Tremaine doesn't care for the country. She'll want to leave the moment she can, and I shall not go with her, said Ella, collapsing onto the bench. For now, I shall endure, and eventually I shall be in Fresno without my stepmother. I'll be able to get work with the tailor or start doing specialty embroidery for people. I might be able to have a relationship with my stepsisters, perhaps even stepmother. I think distance will make our relationships easier. August sat next to her. You shouldn't have to endure anything, though. It's really not that bad, she said. It could certainly be worse. If this wasn't that bad, what would Ella put up with? And what had she already endured to make this acceptable? She reached one hand out to brush the lavender blooms and let a cricket crawl into her palm before it jumped away. When my father and Lady Tremaine got married, he made me promise to treat them like family. And that means not giving up on our new family, even when it gets hard. I won't break that promise. All right, August said, even though he wanted to ask if they were trying at all to treat her like family. He had tried a few times, and it wasn't his place to do anything more. She could be right about all of it. All he could do now was offer an escape if she ever did need it. You know, you can write and ask me to return, and I shall. Ella went still. Her eyes fluttered shut, and August worried that he shouldn't have brought it up. Would you have come back then? I know you offered to, but everyone offers to do things, she whispered. They don't always mean it, especially when they're a child who couldn't even stand to return to the town their mother was buried in. She turned slightly, staring at him from the corner of her eye, and August flinched. He hadn't wanted to return to Fresno. He hadn't wanted to face the cemetery or the statue of his mother's grave, and looking back, he hadn't tried very hard to find out if she really wanted him to stay away. You did ask me to stay away, he said slowly, though you are right. I didn't really want to return to Fresno. I would have, but I shouldn't have made you ask that of me. And I should have said what I wanted, she sighed. Children aren't great at communicating. He laughed. No, we were not. But we're not children anymore. True. Ella, he said, and turned to face her. There were stars in her eyes, flickering as she met his gaze. I don't want us to lose touch again, whether that is visiting or writing letters or both." She nodded, nudged him to turn back so that they were both facing the field, and laid her head on his shoulder. "I knew if I pushed and asked, you would come. Even when we hadn't written in years, I knew you would still answer. I'm sorry that I didn't answer you. I won't do that again. I do want to see you again. I don't want to simply write letters. I want this." August took in the horizon, the weight of Ella tucked into his side unfamiliar, but comforting, and rested his head against hers. She threaded her arm through his. "What will you do when you leave?" she asked. August hummed, tempting to say, "Solve this issue and then move on to the next one." But the night called for honesty. "Fight with my father." Ella startled. "What? Why?" "He is desperate for more family, and I am his only avenue for that," said August. "So I've taken any and every job I can these last few years to avoid going home, because I don't want to marry and love and then end up like him when they die." "August," she whispered, "that's not how—" "Do you not want to fall in love?" "Oh, no, I do. The fear isn't really that strong anymore, honestly. I have been avoiding it for a while, but it's much easier to solve everyone else's problems and pretend I don't have any." "Until you have to go home," she said. He squeezed her arm. "Until I have to go home." Ella took a deep breath and withdrew her arm from his, squaring her shoulders toward the stars. "Well, the first step for both of us, then, is to stop avoiding our fears." She held out her hand, and August took it without hesitation. Together they rose. "Agreed," he said, tightening his grip on her hand. "No more avoiding anything, though I would say this conversation was necessary." Hand still in his, she glanced back over her shoulder and smiled. "I look forward to when the mouse plays start arriving." Night had fully sunk over the fields, and it settled around August like a shield. They could do this. They could mean something to each other again. "I feared I'm a retired playwright," he said, and brought her hand to his mouth. "I still have all of your letters in those mittens." It wasn't a kiss. Her skin never touched his lips, but it was a promise. She stumbled and nodded. He placed her hand back at her side. They walked slowly. The night was quiet and still, the chirps of birds and crickets a distant dirge. Neither spoke. August tried not to think of the memorial statue standing empty-handed in the night, his mother's bracelet gone, every token of joy and sadness ripped from Fresnay like the memories had been. He knew Ella was thinking of the same thing. She had left her father's pocket watch there. Would anything be left of it? Soon enough, the white stone of the statue guarding the front of the cemetery came into view. They looked alive at night, every ripple of moonlight granting their hands movement and glittering across the goods draped over them. August froze, a hot and sticky taste like vomit coating his tongue, and Ella grabbed his hand. The memory was fuzzy. Their conversation lost to time and grief. Unwanted images overtook him. Ella, small as a mouse, clutched a crown of purple and white flowers to her chest. August swallowed as the heady floral scent drifted over him, and the wind upset a necklace dangling from the statue's neck. Gold and silver glinted in the painfully bright light as the morning sun overtook the Fresnay memorial, and his gaze stuck to a pair of glass flowers resting atop a steel box at the soldier's feet. They reminded him of the heavy bracelet in his hands. It took him ages, long after Ella crowned the statue and left, to look away. He couldn't remember how long he lingered, or what he said as he raged against how unfair it was, only that he had left his mother's bracelet on the statue's wrist. "We can do this," she said, squeezing his hand and interrupting his thoughts. "I remember seeing a gold chain, a necklace of seed pearls, and 2 enameled boxes, and I left my father's pocket watch. Blanche left the cuff on the soldier's spear." August swallowed. The pearl necklace broke objects. And there was a steel lock box at the statue's feet. You used it to reach the statue's helm. They approached the statue together. There were little purses and boxes, each of them closed at the statue's feet, protecting their items from the elements. Withered flowers and rotting cloth fluttered from the soldier's arms. August's gaze rose to the soldier's wrists. It was bare. The words wouldn't come. They stuck in his throat, sharp as knives, and his chest tightened. He had foolishly thought that one day he might return for his mother's bracelet, but that choice had been taken from him. He wouldn't be able to keep his promise to his mother. His watch isn't here, Ella said, slipping away from August and pacing around the statue. There isn't much on the ground either. That's where most things would have fallen. It would make sense for some things to go missing, to be taken by nature, but not everything. August leaned forward and opened one of the purses, empty save for one coin to weigh it down. Fury filled the hole in his heart. Someone stole the offerings, he spat. They stole everything. Who would... Ella touched the statue's empty hand and swallowed. No one in Fresno would do this. This was the worst wound of all. Everyone in Fresno knew how beloved the memorial was and the unspoken rule of leaving it undisturbed. No one would dare steal from it. Yet someone had. They weren't even careful, said August. Ella sniffed and wiped her face. How did no one notice? The bracelet, the necklaces, the pocket watch, those aren't things that just fly off in a gust of wind. Whoever did this probably did it slowly, August said, checking every box to be sure. I bet they started small, and then as time went on and no one noticed, they got more confident. Was your father's watch engraved? Only with a date. My birthday, said Ella. I don't know if Natalie would recognize it. She might not recognize any of it, since she's not from Fresno. So maybe she wasn't aware. But then, why not say so? The cuff wasn't changed that much, but the locket was rarely common and split in half. The rings and wolf head were probably melted down from other objects. August touched a threadbare cloak hanging from the statue's shoulders. With all the wear on some of the items, I bet Natalie had to entirely rework some, and no one would go into her store looking for the objects left at the memorial. If they saw something similar, would they even say anything? Or would they assume it was grief making them see things? For a while, every pocket watch I saw made me cry, so I avoided looking at them. I don't know if I would have noticed anyone using my father's until recently. August nodded. I would only recognize my mother's bracelet because it's unique, as a bracelet. If the glass beads were split among several things, I might not. Even though he wanted to think he would, he had seen dozens of glass beads and earrings and necklaces over the years and never once even considered it. It wasn't far-fetched that no one would recognize their offerings to the memorial. Maybe the stealing is what did this, he muttered. Maybe the memory loss is a punishment for stealing from the memorial or something. Ella stared up at him. Is that possible? Maybe, August said slowly. The memorial stood for centuries, collecting trinkets and prayers and probably wishes from the grieving. Maybe enough magic had settled in and around the memorial over the years to affect people. Then, would returning them end this? She asked. We could do that, I bet. We could try to make a list of everything that's been left here in the last 20 years or so. But that will take time. Any solution will take time, said August, reaching out to take her hand. But no matter how long or how difficult, we'll get the items and memories back. We have a good lead now. We can do this.